na 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 na. Bam bam. Oh na 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 na. Bam bam. Oh na 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 na. Bam bam. Oh na 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 na. Dig it up. Oh na 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 na. Dig it up. Oh na 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 na. Bam bam. Bir bam bam bir bam bir de. Bir bam bam. Bir bam bir de. Bir bam bam bir bam bam bir bam bir de. Bir bam bam. Bir bam bir bam 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 bam. Bir bam bir de. Bir bam bam.
Good day, everyone. Welcome to Home and Away Jamaica, where we connect Jamaica and the diaspora. With me today, again, for those who saw our last program, is Stacy Salmon. Stacy is a managing partner at Taylor Law. And we thought it would be good to bring Stacy on to have a discussion or more pointed discussion on specific issues in the law. We spoke the last time about bringing land to first registration, unregistered land. During that discussion, we raised the issue of adverse possession. And many of us know adverse possession as squatting. And we'll refer to it as adverse possession, but we're referring to squatting. So what we wanted Stacy to do today is discuss with us and share some instances when adverse possession arises, the circumstances, and perhaps some ways an application can successfully be submitted and approved to the registrar. So welcome, Stacy. Happy to have you again.
Thank you, Robert. Good to be here again.
So Stacy, before going into the actual process, what I thought would be good was to share with our viewers and our listeners really the genesis of adverse possession. And so adverse possession, as we understand it and we spoke about, is squatting. You know, the basic principle behind adverse possession is the Crown really owns all land. The Crown, the state, the government owns all land and gives each possessor of that land a right to title for, initially it was a defined period. And over time, these interests became successive life interest. And what the Crown's saying is at any time, we can relieve you of that interest if we feel, as in the case of adverse possession, you're sleeping on your rights. So, you know, the ownership of land is considered a privilege. And if you have land that's unattended and someone else has an economic interest in that land, then under certain circumstances, we're going to give you that right. So we know too from the law that adverse possession started, the law's genesis was with farmland. So if, you know, land was unattended for a certain period of time, it could grow up, it could become a nuisance. So the law allowed someone who would tend to that land to come into possession. So Stacy, share with us some of the more common cases in today's world.
Sure. So, Robert, what we see a lot in our practice is persons that have been in occupation of vacant land for a period of 12 years or more, where they are able to claim a valid legal ownership to the land. And this arises where the owner or the title owner, for example, migrates and does not attend to the land. As you said prior, the law does not give the legal owner, the law doesn't enable a legal owner to claim or assert his rights for someone that has slept on his rights, meaning that they have not maintained the land, they have not ensured that they, you know, exercise their right of ownership. So this leaves a gap and allows a squatter to enter upon the land and claim legal ownership.
What are some of the things that that person, if someone comes to you and says, I've been in possession for, 10 years on this land or 8 years on this land, what are some of the questions you would ask that person?
All right. So just to state first that 8 years is not sufficient under the law. So if you want to dispossess a title owner, you have to be able to establish that you have been in open, undisturbed, and undisputed possession for more than 12 years. And if it is government-owned land, you'd have to establish your ownership, your claim of ownership for more than 60 years. And one way to do that is to establish that you have been in an occupation, claiming against the right of ownership of the title owner, meaning that you have fenced the land, you have farmed on the land, you've set up residence, you've erected a boundary fence, you've paid the property taxes. If there's a building on the land that you've maintained, you've paid the utility bills, for example, the property taxes, and also the neighbors are able to corroborate, or other persons in the community are able to corroborate your claim of ownership in this manner.
So what you seem to be suggesting that to the bystander, someone coming by and observing, there is nothing to suggest to that bystander that you are not the legal owner.
That's correct. So your claim of ownership, or your acts of ownership, I should say, must not be in secret. So you can't go onto the land in the night and leave early in the morning. You should be able to exercise your claim of ownership in open to the view of the public.
And so the law speaks to Stacy about dispossessing the title holder of his ownership. So any knowledge that if you've indicated to the title holder that you know your possession is contrary to the title they hold, that could also affect your application.
Right.
So tell me, one of the things we hear very commonly when we speak to persons about adverse possessions, or we hear adverse possession being discussed in the public domain, is persons saying, you know, I've paid the property taxes. There's this land that my grandfather owned or some cousins owned. They migrated to the UK, and I pay the property taxes. And so can I file an application? How would you address that question?
Right, so just paying the property taxes in and of itself is not sufficient to claim ownership. As stated before, you have to be able to, what's important for the squatter to establish their claim of ownership is to show that they've been in open, undisturbed, and undisputed possession for more than 12 years.
Does that period, Stacy, have to be continuous? Do you have to be in possession for 12 continuous consecutive years?
Yes, the period of 12 years must be continuous. So you can't be in occupation for 3 years, leave, come back, occupy it for another 3 years. That wouldn't be a sufficient claim of ownership. It must be a continuous consecutive period of 12 years.
Great. So, you know, in a nutshell, we've established the genesis of adverse possession or squatting, as we also know it. You've stated very clearly that there must be undisturbed possession. You must have kept the world out at large, so you must have fenced the property. Persons, passerbys, it should be clear to them that you're in possession. One other thing I would add and advise our listeners in terms of the chain of possession is if that chain of possession is consecutive squatting by different persons. So if one person, you know, one family is squatting on that land and they spend 3 or 4 years, another one spends 6 or 7 years, And the total period of squatting adds up to that 12-year limitation that could still ground an application by the last person in possession. So that's just something I would point out that the law facilitates. Stacy, before we wrap up, we're going to keep it very short. We've spoken about persons who intentionally displace the title holder. What about persons who unknowingly, for example, we have two bordering properties and one person's fence or wall encroaches on the neighbor's land, maybe not significantly, but this has happened for a number of years over the limitation period. Is there a way for that person who has done the encroachment to acquire that land that had been occupied through adverse possession?
Right, so there's case law that explicitly establishes that very point. So in a situation where you have encroached on your neighbor's land for upwards of 12 years, what you can do, you can have a surveyor do a survey of that piece that you've encroached upon and adversely possess your neighbor.
Okay, so in that way, that additional sliver of land would be added to your title.
That's correct.
And you would regularize that previous encroachment.
Right.
Well, Stacy, thank you. I think that was very pointed. We are going to go today. Thanks for sharing with us, and we look forward to you joining us another time to share very specific aspects of the law, which many of us and many of our listeners have an interest in understanding more. Thank you, and bye for now. Home and away, Jamaica. We'll see you next time.
Thank you.
TV, bam bam, on the street, bam bam.